say that they believe India Kinamore's murder was premeditated.
Her child was 6 years old when this murder happened. And the surveillance of the apartment, you can hear he killed his own son or plotted to kill his own son.
Early in the morning on March 4th, 2023, intruders broke into a house on Hidden Meadows Drive in Colerain Township, Ohio. Two people were in bed inside that house. 26-year-old India Kinamore, 9 months pregnant, just hours from her due date, and 30-year-old Kevon Warren, the father of her unborn child. The intruders opened fire. India Kinamore died at the scene from gunshot wounds. So did her unborn son. Kevon Warren, lying in that same bed, inches away from her, wasn't touched. What looked at first like a robbery gone wrong would turn out to be something far more calculated and far more disturbing. In this video, we're unraveling the secret everyone in that bedroom was keeping on March 4th. India. Nicole Kinamore was born May 12, 1996 in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was 26 when she died, and she'd spent her last years in Colerain Township, a Cincinnati suburb, the same place where the tragedy happened. There's no public record of her childhood, her school years, or her early life. Neither her family nor India herself ever put that part of her story out into the world. People who knew her described someone whose whole life revolved around family. One close friend told reporters that knowing India meant loving her, that she was beautiful inside and out.
India is a beautiful lady in and out. To know India is to love her. Her soul is so pure. Any time you're with her, it's always a good time, no matter what.
That same friend said India lived for her family and doted on her son, the boy she was raising with Kevon Warren. For the people closest to her, motherhood wasn't just one part of who she was. It was the center of her life. It says something that every memory shared about India in those first days after the tragedy circled back to the same thing: her family, her son. Nobody who spoke publicly mentioned her career, her hobbies, anything outside of who she was as a mother and a partner. Colerain Township, where the couple lived, is one of those Cincinnati suburbs where something like this almost never happens. A quiet area of single-family homes and apartment complexes. The kind of place families move to specifically to get away from violence. This was the setting where India Kinamore was getting ready to welcome her second child. The last place anyone would expect this. A house that, from the outside, looked exactly like every other house on the block. India Kinamore and Kevon Warren had been together for several years, living in that same house on Hidden Meadows Drive, the house where the tragedy would eventually happen. They already had one child together, a 6-year-old son, which means their relationship had lasted at least 7 years by that point, long enough to have their first child, build a life together, and, it turns out, go through things the world wouldn't learn about until much later. There's no public record of how India and Kevon met or how their relationship started. Not much is known about Kevon Warren during this period. He was 30, had a steady job, no criminal record. A detail people would come back to again and again once they tried to make sense of what happened. On paper, this was a man with a stable life, a job, a home, one kid already here, another on the way. None of the couple's neighbors or acquaintances ever went on record describing what Warren was actually like day to day. And his childhood, his education, his relationships before India, none of that is public either. India was pregnant again, this time with a boy, and the couple had already picked out his name, Colerain. The pregnancy went full term, and in early March 2023, her doctors scheduled her for a labor induction on the 4th. Induction is standard when a pregnancy's reached full term, but contractions haven't started on their own. Doctors set a specific date for the mother to come in and have labor started medically. For India, that date was March 4th. Her mother, Terry Kinamore, said her daughter couldn't wait to hold her son, a moment, it would turn out, she was never going to get. Behind that picture-perfect image of a family getting ready for their second child, there was a lot going on that almost nobody around them seemed to know about. Kevon Warren was in serious financial trouble, bad enough that he was at risk of losing the house. At the same time, he was seeing another woman behind India's back, and by some accounts, trying to rekindle things with an ex-girlfriend. And here's the detail that matters most for where this story goes. Warren had repeatedly pushed India to get an abortion. She refused. By the time he apparently stopped pushing, the pregnancy was too far along for Ohio law to even allow it. That gap between what the people around them saw and what was actually happening inside that house raises questions nobody's ever been able to answer. And it's worth pointing out, Not one neighbor, co-worker, or friend ever reported noticing tension, conflict, or distress between India and Kevon in the months leading up to her death. First question, did India know how bad Warren's finances really were? They'd lived together for years, split expenses, raised a child together. It's hard to imagine something as serious as losing the house staying completely hidden from someone sharing that daily life and that budget with him. If she knew, how did she see it? A rough patch they'd get through together, or something driving a wedge between them? And if she didn't know, how well was Warren hiding that part of his life from her? And what does that say about a relationship built on years together, where one partner was apparently keeping an entire financial crisis under wraps? Second question, the affair. Did India ever pick up on any signs that Warren was seeing someone else? Or did it blindside her the same way it blindsided everyone else? The answer shapes how you read those last few months together. Were they just an ordinary, if stressful stretch for two people getting ready to have a baby? Or was one partner quietly living a double life while staying by her side every single day? One more thing worth noting. Warren wasn't just seeing someone casually. He was reportedly trying to get back together with an ex, specifically, not a fling, an attempt to return to an old relationship while his current partner was carrying his second child. There's no way to know what was driving that. Nostalgia, disappointment in the life he had, or something more calculated.
At some point, the evidence that has been uncovered was that he wanted her to terminate that pregnancy.
Third question, and the most direct one. How much pressure did Warren actually put on India to end the pregnancy? And what was that like for her to go through? She refused, and she decided to keep the baby. That much we know for certain. What was behind that decision? Conviction that she was doing the right thing, hope that a new baby would change things between them. Something else she never told anyone. There's no way to know from what's available today. None of these questions got answered while India was alive. On the surface, the couple kept doing what thousands of expecting families do. Doctor's appointments, conversations about the future, watching the due date get closer on the calendar. March 4th was coming like any other day on the calendar. The day a boy named Colerain was supposed to be born. A day India had been counting down to, apparently with no idea what that day actually had in store for her. Before we get into it, if this case has you hooked, hit that like button. It helps stories like this one get told. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation. And drop a comment. What's your take on this one? Now, let's continue. March 4th, 2023 was the day India Kinamore's doctors had scheduled her for labor induction. But a few hours before sunrise, people entered that house. According to prosecutors, nothing about that night was spontaneous. Kevon Warren had allegedly set the whole thing up in advance through a group chat with two other men, his cousin, Robert Irwin, and Irwin's half-brother, Lamar Morris Suggs. By the time everything was set to happen that night, Irwin and Suggs were already parked nearby, a block over. According to investigators, Irwin had his car positioned near the scene. The three men had been texting back and forth throughout the night, a paper trail that would eventually end up as evidence in the case file. Public records don't say how long this correspondence went on for, hours, days, or weeks leading up to that night. What's clear is that by the time Irwin and Suggs were in position outside the house, the plan had already been set between all three of them. Irwin and Suggs didn't go straight in. They waited outside until Warren got home and gave them the signal. Exactly how long they waited isn't in the public record, only that it happened in those quiet, empty pre-dawn hours in hidden meadows when most of the neighborhood was still asleep. According to investigators, at some point that night, Warren went inside, got into bed next to India while she slept, and only then reached out to the two men waiting outside to let them know it was clear. The break-in happened just before 4:30 a.m. According to the person who called it in, the shooter came in through the back door, not the front, facing the street, but the side entrance, less visible to anyone passing by at that hour. It's still not confirmed which of the two men, Irwin or Suggs, actually went inside and which one stayed outside. Prosecutors have named Lamar Morris Suggs as the alleged shooter, but the language in the case file stays vague on this point. It only says the shots were fired by one of them. India Kinamore was asleep when it happened. One of the intruders shot her multiple times. Kevon Warren, lying in that same bed, inches from her, walked away without a scratch. The shooter, supposedly there to commit a robbery, only fired at one of the two adults in that room.
Three men staged the scene to try to make it look like a burglary and a robbery. Investigators say Warren was the father of Kinamore's unborn.
After the shooting, all three men set about staging the scene to make it look like a robbery. They left behind the kind of mess you'd expect from someone tearing through a house looking for valuables. Public case files don't specify exactly what was taken or staged to look taken. There's no way to know from what's available today whether this part played out fast and chaotic or careful and deliberate. At the moment the shots were fired, there was one more person in that house, India and Kevon's 6-year-old son. He wasn't physically hurt. The 3 men staging the robbery were working just a few feet from the bedroom where he was sleeping. How long the staging took, and when exactly the boy woke up or realized what had happened, none of that is in the public case files. A call came into Hamilton County Dispatch at 4:33 a.m. Public sources don't say who made that call. Colerain Township Police arrived shortly after 4:30, somewhere between 4:39 and 4:40 a.m., according to available reports, meaning they were on scene within minutes of the call coming in.
Baby also died. Police have not said anything about a suspect or any arrests in the case.
India Kinamore was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple gunshot wounds. That's standard procedure when the injuries leave no real question about the outcome, and there's no need to transport the victim to a hospital. The exact number of wounds isn't specified in public records. She was found in the bed where she'd been sleeping. Her unborn son, due to be born that same day, just hours later, died too. Sources disagree slightly on the exact timeline. Alongside the reported 4:33 a.m. call and the police response shortly after, some outlets cite a later time, closer to 6 a.m. Once police arrived, they sealed off the house and the surrounding property. In that instant, 2,369 Hidden Meadows Drive stopped being the home of a family expecting their second child and became a crime scene. Even at this early stage, the story doesn't add up. If this was really a robbery that ended in an accidental shooting, why did the shooter go straight to the right room? And in a house with 3 people, a sleeping couple and a 6-year-old, why was India Kinamore the only one hit, firing an accurate shot in a dark bedroom, lit only by streetlight through a window, takes either very lucky visibility or precise knowledge of exactly where each person was lying. The type of weapon used has never been made public, a detail that usually comes out early in cases like this, but never did here. There's another detail that doesn't fit the random robbery theory. People who break into a house for money generally try to avoid any contact with the people inside. The last thing they want is gunfire that's going to bring the whole neighborhood running. What happened here was the opposite. The shooter walked into a room with 2 sleeping adults and opened fire without any apparent effort to stay quiet or unnoticed. And somehow, the man in that same bed wasn't in any danger. Neither was the child down the hall. Random burglars picking a house at random can't know the bedroom layout in advance, and they definitely can't know exactly when the homeowner is going to be lying in bed next to the person they supposedly came to rob. The fact that Irwin and Suggs waited outside until Warren got home and gave the signal tells you their entry was timed around someone specific being inside, not a random target picked in the middle of the night. On their own, none of these details prove much. The timing could have a dozen explanations. The undisclosed weapon could just be standard police discretion early in a case. The unharmed witness could be luck or caution on the shooter's part. But stack them together, the exact timing, the precise target, the untouched man in the bed, the untouched child down the hall, and a staged crime scene built to hide all of it, and you get a pattern that's hard to write off as coincidence. If this was staged, it would have served one very specific purpose. Pulling police attention away from the one person in that house who by all rights should have been a suspect from day one, Kevon Warren. That's the scene Colerain Township Police walked into in those first few minutes at the house on Hidden Meadows Drive. Nothing in that house, not one piece of furniture, not one detail documented by the responding officers, answered the question of what had actually happened there just hours before sunrise. When Colerain Township Police sat down with the only surviving witness, Kevon Warren gave them his version of events. According to prosecutors, that version was a lie from the start. Warren gave police false details about the weapon used to kill India Kinamore, and false descriptions of the people who supposedly broke into the house. Descriptions investigators would later determine didn't match reality at all. The staged robbery that had started before police even arrived kept going after they got there. Warren, it seems, was banking on his own story, backed up by a house that looked broken into, to keep the investigation away from him. For those first few hours, it seemed to work. The man in bed next to the victim gave police a clean, coherent account, one where he came across as just as much a victim of circumstance as India was. There was no way to check any of it on the spot. in those first hours after the murder. Nobody had pulled his phone records yet. Nobody had checked his finances or his location data against what he was telling them. That version, the one Warren gave police in those first few hours, is exactly what detectives would spend the next 2+ years trying to tear apart. India Kinamore's body was found by her 6-year-old son. The boy, hiding under a blanket, didn't go to his father, who was right there in the same house.
Her child was 6 years old when this murder happened, and he was in the house. I got the phone call from my grandson.
He called his grandmother, Terry Kinamore, instead. She later said her grandson's voice was shaking when he told her to come, that someone shot his mom, that someone broke into the house, that he was scared, that his mom was screaming. The fact that this child reached for his grandmother instead of the father standing just a few feet away is a detail India's family has never stopped coming back to. The exact sequence of those minutes, when the boy actually called his grandmother, whether police were already there, what was happening in that house between the shots and the call, can't be fully pieced together from what's publicly known. Terry Kinamore also said that on the security footage from the Hidden Meadows complex, you can hear her daughter scream with every shot fired.
The surveillance of the apartment, you can hear my child screaming every time she got shot, but not once did you hear Mr. Warren.
That recording became part of the evidence investigators worked through, alongside witness statements and physical evidence. The audio alone couldn't confirm who was in the room when the shots were fired, but it captured how many shots were fired and the timing between them, which meant it could later be checked against everyone's statements, including the account Warren gave police that morning. The investigation that started on the morning of March 4th didn't move fast. The case sat unsolved for more than 2 years. On the Ohio Attorney General's website, it was listed in the Unsolved Homicide database. No arrests, just a contact name for anyone with information. Detective Johnson, 5133857-054, Colerain Township Police, Sergeant Mike Stockmeyer later made a point of saying that even though the case sat without an arrest for over 2 years, it was never closed, never abandoned. He said the complexity of the case, the planning that clearly went into it, took time to unravel, that investigators had to peel back the layers to understand what had actually happened. That statement pushes back hard against how the case looked from the outside, a cold case gathering dust in a database, and suggests there was constant work happening behind the scenes that the public just couldn't see. Over those 2+ years, detectives with Hamilton County and Colerain Township ran dozens of interviews.
Prosecutors say a complex investigation yielded cell phone records and location evidence pointing to Warren, Robert Irvin, and the alleged gunman Lamar Morris Suggs.
They dug through financial records, phone records, and geolocation data. The kind of information that can place someone at a specific spot at a specific time, whether or not they want to talk about it. One entire thread of the investigation focused on the messages between Warren, Irwin, and Suggs, which investigators apparently pieced together phone by phone. The financial digging tied directly back to something investigators had already flagged: Warren's money troubles. Going through bank accounts, credit history, and payment records, tedious, routine work, could confirm or rule out just how serious those financial problems really were, and whether they had anything to do with what happened that night. Phone records and location data let investigators reconstruct where each of the 3 men was in the hours leading up to 4:30 a.m. Exactly the kind of information they'd never get by just asking. On August 21st, 2025, Colerain Township Police announced the arrests.
It happened. A Hamilton County grand jury indicted these 3 men, 30-year-old Kevon Warren, 20-year-old Robert Irvin, and 22-year-old Lamar Suggs.
Hamilton County prosecutor Connie Pillich announced charges against 3 men whose names had never been public as suspects for nearly 2.5 years: Kevon Warren, Robert Irwin, and Lamar Morris Suggs. For anyone in Hamilton County who knew these men, this news landed like a shockwave. A case that had all but faded from memory was suddenly back in the headlines, this time with names and faces attached. When Terry Kinamore heard about the arrests, she said it confirmed what she'd believed the whole time, that this case was never going to stay unsolved.
He killed his own son, or plotted to kill his own son. He's been out for 2 years while this investigation is going on, while my daughter and his grandson are resting in a grave.
She said now she could go back to her daughter and tell her, the people who did this to you have been caught and justice is coming. 2 of the 3, Warren and Irwin, were arrested and booked in 2025. The third, Lamar Morris Suggs, was already behind bars. He was serving a 3-year sentence at the Warren County Correctional Facility in Lebanon on a 2024 conviction for illegal firearm possession, unrelated to the Kinamore case, but it meant investigators already knew exactly where to find him once the case caught up to him. Public sources don't go into much detail about how each of the 3 men was actually taken into custody or under what circumstances. What's known is that by the end of the day, on August 21st, 2025, all 3 were officially charged in a case that had spent 2.5 years as one of Hamilton County's most talked about unsolved mysteries. The Hamilton County grand jury returned a 13-count indictment. 4 of those counts were aggravated murder, 2 for India Kinamore, and 2 more for her unborn son, who under Ohio law counts as a separate victim in cases like this. On top of that, burglary and aggravated assault. Separately, Warren and Suggs were both charged with illegal firearm possession. Both men had prior convictions barring them from legally owning a gun, which made the weapon itself an additional charge stacked on top of everything else. Aggravated murder is its own category under Ohio law, separate from ordinary murder. It requires aggravating factors like premeditation, a connection to another serious crime, or particular cruelty, and it's the classification that opens the door to a maximum sentence of life in prison. The fact that prosecutors chose this classification for all 4 counts from the very beginning tells you they believe they can prove this was planned, not spontaneous. One piece of evidence stood out among everything prosecutors presented. Before India died, Warren had already asked his employer for bereavement leave.
Deadly shooting to plan it all out. They also say Warren even requested bereavement leave from his job before Kinamore even died.
Prosecutors say this detail points directly to premeditation. A man who, according to his own story, was about to learn of his partner's death as a random tragedy had somehow already arranged time off to grieve her. The logic here is simple, which is exactly why it stands out. You request bereavement leave after a loss has happened, or when one is already coming, not when there's no reason to expect one. If Warren made that request before March 4th, then at the time he made it, he already knew a loss was coming. That's not knowledge someone has if they're simply an expecting father with no connection to what happens next. Assistant prosecutor David Hickenlooper told the court that, by all indications, the defendant and his accomplices conspired to come up with a plan to kill Ms. Kinamore and her unborn child.
Conspiring to come up with this plan to kill Ms. Kinamore and her unborn child.
That phrase, "we conspired to devise a plan," carries legal weight. It points to something planned in advance and split between multiple people, not a crime that happened in the heat of the moment. Warren and Irwin were held at the Hamilton County Detention Center on $600,000 bail each. At one hearing, Warren's attorney, Clyde Bennett, asked the court to lower that to $300,000, pointing out that his client had a steady job, no prior record, and hadn't left town in 2 years, despite knowing an investigation was ongoing. Robert Irwin's attorney made a similar request. The defense used that 2-year stretch, Warren staying put, knowing he was under investigation, as proof that he didn't see himself as guilty and had no intention of running. Prosecutors seemed to read that same fact completely differently. A man confident in his own cover story, confident that no evidence would surface, could easily afford to stick around and keep living his normal life instead of raising suspicion by fleeing. Terry Kinamore and India's sister both testified against lowering the bail.
Someone willing to engage in this level of violence against people that they really care about, love.
India's sister told the court her family didn't feel safe. The judge kept bail at $600,000 for each defendant, with mandatory electronic monitoring if released, and a no-contact order barring them from the Kinamore family. All 3 men pleaded not guilty. Warren's attorney, Clyde Bennett, publicly framed his client as a victim in this, not a perpetrator. Irwin's attorney, Robert Jones, built his defense around distance, arguing his client's only connection to any of this was being part of a group chat with Warren and Suggs, with no other tie to the victim at all. Bennett and Jones are running 2 very different defenses. Bennett isn't denying Warren was involved that night. He's disputing how that involvement should be read, insisting his client never wanted India or the baby dead.
The only tie that he has with this case is from some messages that apparently have the 2 co-defendants in and allegedly have Mr. Irving.
Jones is going the other direction, trying to minimize Irwin's involvement entirely. If the only thing linking him to this is a group chat, the question becomes whether he actually knew what the plan was, or only had a partial picture of it. According to prosecutors, Warren, as the father of the child killed alongside its mother, chose this as his way of resolving the situation he was in. That's a statement made at one of the hearings, and it makes clear that prosecutors see this murder as Warren's response to an unwanted pregnancy, not as an accident he happened to get caught up in. All three men face life in prison if convicted on the aggravated murder counts. As of the most recent information available, the case is still in the trial phase. Not guilty pleas entered, a trial still ahead, with a date to be set following further hearings. Looking ahead at how a trial like this might play out, there's a lot working in the prosecution's favor. Aggravated murder charges involving a pregnant woman and her unborn child sit among the most serious categories in Ohio law, and they'll get scrutiny at every stage. The added firearm charges against Warren and Suggs, plus evidence pointing to planning ahead of time, including that bereavement leave request, could go a long way toward proving intent, which is the whole ballgame when it comes to aggravated murder versus a lesser charge. Given everything investigators gathered, the messages between the three men, the financial records, the location data, the bereavement leave, prosecutors will likely lean on a mountain of circumstantial evidence rather than a confession or a single-star witness. That approach cuts both ways. It's harder for the defense to knock down several independent threads of evidence at once, but the defense only needs to poke enough holes in a few of them to unravel the whole narrative. Lamar Morris Suggs, the man prosecutors have named as the alleged shooter, is in an unusual position. He's already serving time on an unrelated case, so any new sentence here just gets added on top. That could cut either way. It might mean he's got nothing left to lose in a negotiation, or it might make his attorneys push hard for leniency, since he's locked up regardless. There's another angle worth watching here too, a plea deal. In cases built on circumstantial evidence, where defendants had different levels of involvement, prosecutors often offer the less involved players a reduced charge in exchange for testimony against the others. Whether Robert Irwin, whose whole defense is built around minimizing his role, ends up being that guy is still an open question as of the latest reporting. All of this is speculation based on the charges and each side's current position. No trial date, no outcome. As of the most recent coverage, India Kinamore and her unborn son are buried at Spring Grove Cemetery in Cincinnati, one of the largest historic cemeteries in Ohio. India and Kevon Warren's 6-year-old son, the boy who lived through that night, is still living with his mother's family. Terry Kinamore, India's mother, has been the voice carrying this case from day one to today. She said she never gave up. A lot of people thought this case would never get solved, but she trusted in God, and that faith, in her words, didn't let her down. 2.5 years, a stretch that from the outside looked like a case frozen in an unsolved homicide database, meant 2.5 years of waiting for a mother whose daughter had been murdered, with absolutely no guarantee it would ever lead anywhere. After the arrests, looking back, Terry described Warren in terms that were nothing like how she would have described him before March 4th, 2023. She said she used to think of Kevon as a decent, likable person. Turns out he was the complete opposite. A monster, in her words, because only a monster could do something like this. That statement lands because it captures exactly the gap this whole story is built around. The difference between who someone appears to be and what they're actually capable of. A gap that could only be guessed at until the charges came down and has now been confirmed by someone who knew Warren personally for years. Terry also talked about how Warren carried himself after the murder, all through the investigation, acting, in her words, like nothing had happened. She called it a slap in the face, a revelation that instantly wiped out all the years she'd spent thinking of him as family. The man she considered the father of her 2 grandchildren stayed in her life as family right up until the moment investigators officially named him a suspect. There's no public information, as of 2025, on how the 6-year-old boy who survived that night is doing now. What he'll think of his father once he's old enough to go back and read the case files himself. Nobody knows the answer to that. Probably not even him, given that his entire childhood got split in 2 by one night. This case pulled attention well beyond Hamilton County. Local Cincinnati outlets, Fox 19 and WXIX covered it, and so did national and international press, People magazine, the New York Post, the UK's The Independent, and Indian outlets, Times of India and NDTV. The fact that a case out of a quiet Cincinnati suburb caught attention on the other side of the world says a lot about how big the reaction was once the arrests came down. That kind of reach comes down to a handful of factors, none of which would have carried this story alone. The murder happening on the same day as her due date created a contrast too tragic for headlines to pass up. The bereavement leave detail turned into that rare piece of evidence that's both legally significant and instantly understandable. Nobody needed it explained to see why it mattered. And the overall shape of the story, 2+ years of silence, a case buried in a cold case database, then a sudden arrest of 3 people, hits exactly the kind of arc true crime audiences have come to expect. One question is still open, and it's the kind of question that should have a clear answer by now. Which of the 2 men who went into that house actually pulled the trigger? Prosecutors have named Lamar Morris Suggs as the alleged shooter, but the case files still use vague language on this point. Whether that gets nailed down at trial, or whether investigators are deliberately holding off on naming a shooter until there's a verdict, there's no way to know from what's public right now. The central question of this whole case, guilt, is still officially unresolved. All 3 men have pleaded not guilty, and as of the latest reports, none of the trials have wrapped with a conviction or an acquittal.
Of course, going to continue following all 3 of these cases as they make their way through the court system. For now, outside of the Justice Center, Brenda Ordonez, Fox 19 Now.
Outside the courtroom, though, for the Kinamore family, that question already feels settled. Terry Kinamore still visits her daughter's and grandson's graves at Spring Grove Cemetery regularly. In her words, only now, with the people she believes are responsible under arrest, can the family maybe start to find a little peace. Though from the way she talks about her loss, that peace is never going to be complete. India Kinamore never got to hold the son she was supposed to meet that day. Neither she, nor her unborn son, nor the 6-year-old boy who survived that night deserved any part of what happened to them. How long it'll take Terry Kinamore to forgive the man she once considered family, the man who was lying next to her daughter the night she was killed. Even she doesn't seem to know the answer to that.